Have you ever considered what you might do if chaos suddenly erupted in America? Where would you go? How would you provide for your family? Essentially, how would you survive? In today's world, these questions aren't just hypothetical scenarios, they could become realities we need to face. Fortunately, we have an expert here today who is uniquely qualified to guide us through these tumultuous times and help us be as prepared as possible. Joining us today is Jeff Houston, former Green Beret and CEO of Tac7 Solutions. Get ready for an insightful and empowering conversation. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Amy.
It's so good to see you.
So great to see you as always.
Little known fact, this isn't the first time that we've done a podcast together.
That's right.
I used to have a show called Not Your Average Gun Girls where we focused on something very similar that we're going to focus on today. But how are things going?
Things are great. Yeah, we're staying busy. The security company is doing well and growing. And
Excellent.
we've got our private gun range that we do some training at. So we're staying active, staying busy.
Coolest gun range, by the way.
It is great. Yeah. It's like we want people to know about it a little bit, but we still keep it private, and that's what makes it special. So
yeah,
it's kind of a double-edged sword.
Yeah, how did that come about? I mean, were you always looking to build a private gun range?
So I moved to Texas 10 years ago, and I got linked up with my good buddy, John Wayne Walding, and who you know,
Yep.
Awesome Green Beret stud, Silver Star recipient. And he was doing training out there. Our friend owned the property and built the gun range for John because he was doing, he had a rifle company. He was building custom rifles. And so we started training out there along with Jeff Kyle, Chris Kyle's brother. And so we were using the range for several years. And then the guy who owned it was like, hey, I kind of want to sell it. And I said, well, let's work something out. And ended up buying it in 2020. And it's been a huge blessing because it's a beautiful spot and it's a great place to train. Only 45 minutes from Dallas.
Well, that's perfect timing. I mean, Did you see a spike in people coming out to the gun range in 2020?
We saw a spike of everything there. I mean, people were coming out trying to buy land everywhere, within a couple hours of Dallas for part of what we're talking about today, right? Just having a place to go, get out of the city. We definitely saw a spike in, gun purchases, gun training, interest in people getting prepared, and firearms is definitely part of that. So our gun range is, it's not what we do full time, but we like to have it for private classes, groups, a lot of charity events.
Yeah. Well, I definitely want to get into all the preparation stuff because people are super interested in that right now. But first, why don't you tell me what makes your background uniquely qualify you to actually be doing this for your clients?
Yeah, sure. It started, basically because I was a Green Beret, Army Special Forces, right? And so becoming a Green Beret is a long process. And then, serving on a ODA, with other great guys, you learn a lot of stuff, right? So, the military teaches you a lot and you learn a lot because you're around really qualified good guys.
What is the process for becoming a Green Beret like?
Oh gosh. Yeah. We could talk for an hour just on that. I mean, obviously it's a rigorous, very hard, very selective process, because they want to get, the right guy. And so it starts with a selection process that's about 28 days long in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And, they put you through all sorts of physical, mental testing, pushing you well beyond your limits, finding your limits, what you're truly capable of. And, only the guys that are, the strongest willed, make it through and get selected. So
is it similar to like BUDS?
I mean, it's both of those programs, the end the process and the result, are very similar, right? They go about it in a little bit different ways. Obviously the BUDS process is more water focused, but it's all about, testing guys, right? Pushing you, seeing who has the resilience and really the desire to make it to the end, right? And it's about an 80% attrition rate.
Did you always think you were going to be a Green Beret?
No, I did not. That started. I was in college, and the towers were hit in 2001, and that kind of got me thinking, gosh, what, how can I serve? How can I, go and serve my country? And after a lot of research and thought process, I was like, okay, a Green Beret sounds like what I would love to strive to do and be. And
what was it that was like drawing you towards that versus maybe some of the other special forces?
I knew I wanted to serve at a high level, or try, right? If I was going to go and, obviously we were going into war, and I definitely wanted to try to serve at the highest level that I could. So I looked at all the different special operations options and kind of narrowed it down to, the Navy SEAL and Green Beret options. And I think I chose to pursue the Green Beret path because I'm not a super strong swimmer for one. So that would have made the buds training harder. And the Green Berets are just a very well-rounded group with well-rounded capabilities, right? So they have the ability to do a lot of different mission sets, learn a second language. So all of that just appealed to me, and
Yeah.
I went after it and was fortunate enough to make it through without getting injured and get selected. And that kind of gave me my start with what I do now. But I've been now in the private sector doing this stuff for, over 10 years. And so started out, when I left the Army, I was doing consulting and training in Denver, working with a couple Navy SEAL guys, buddies of mine. And we were doing security consulting and firearms training. And that led to me starting up my company when I moved to Dallas, 10 years ago. And we just quickly started working with families that were concerned about not just their safety. Like, it's not like they needed, bodyguards all the time, but they were just overall aware and concerned about, needing to be safer in all aspects of their life. And one of those things is preparing for disasters. So, we kind of learned how to get people what they needed supply wise and education wise and training wise. And so we've been doing it now. That's just one of the things that we do is help people, prepare. And so, my qualifications, I guess, really just stem mostly from experience, starting out in the Army and then doing it for over a decade.
Do you ever remember like a point in time, like a specific moment that you started seeing more people coming to you and asking them, okay, I don't feel like I'm prepared?
I think for sure COVID was probably the biggest single instance where people really started realizing, like, okay, I'm not really equipped to deal with a pandemic. I'm not equipped to deal with a lockdown and be comfortable and thrive. And going through things like COVID, which we all experienced, or other things like, Hurricane Katrina or the floods in North Carolina or the fires in California, anytime things like that happen, even if they're not local, it gets people kind of thinking like, what if? And we want people to think what if, right? And start working through those scenarios. So we definitely saw a spike during COVID, especially early on. We saw, I wouldn't say full-fledged panic, but we definitely had a lot of people who were, reaching out to us, wanting firearms, ammo, gas masks, consulting on, setting up their ranches so they could go move their family there if they needed to. So that was kind of the big spike for us.
Yeah. Okay. So in your opinion, in America, 2025, like, what do you think are the biggest threats facing America that could actually push us into like this post-apocalyptic scenario?
I think the biggest threat would be some type of an electronic warfare attack against the United States that shuts down our power grid, right? That's probably the biggest.
And who would that be coming
threat.
from? Like, if you had to guess.
Well, it could come from any foreign adversary. I mean, China is probably the most obvious one, just given their electronic warfare capabilities, and we don't even know how much reach they have in the U.S. kind of ecosystem and power grid, right? But we because we don't fully know or fully understand what their capabilities might be and how embedded they might already be in the U.S. It's just good to know that that's a possibility,
Like,
right?
why haven't they done it yet? If they have the capability to do it, why haven't they done it yet?
Well, I think, with China, they've always played the long game, right? They're very cautious. They're very strategic. So, they just haven't felt the need to do anything yet. So, and I'm not saying that they're going to, but it's, for us, anytime we're working with getting people prepared for disaster, we don't always get specific on what may cause it, because it doesn't, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. It could be an attack from a foreign adversary. It could be a more localized terrorist attack on your water supply. It could be a pandemic. And no matter what it is, the end result is, you might have to rely on yourself and what you have prepared for to survive.
Is there one that you would be more worried about than others? Like, that would cause more mass destruction?
I mean, the biggest thing would be a massive, like EMP, right?
What is that for the people that are like, you keep saying EMP?
So an EMP, electromagnetic pulse, that can be caused just from a localized EMP device, which just will basically shut down anything using a computer chip and electronics. But it also can be caused from a nuclear blast, right? So if there's a nuclear, bomb that goes off up in the atmosphere, right, several miles above the surface of the Earth, it's going to send an electromagnetic pulse out, throughout a radius that could be very large, depending on the strength of it, and that would shut down, pretty much every electronic item you have that's not protected in a Faraday bag. And depending on the strength, it may not actually shut down everything, but it's going to be, if it was a large EMP, it would disrupt, it would change the world as we know it. Just because everything would just shut down. Like, right, gas pumps wouldn't work because they rely on electronics, right? Electronic pumps. Anyone that's using medication that needs to be refrigerated is no longer going to have access to that, right? And you can just see this immediate trickle down effect of our logistical supply chain gets shut down, right? And at first, people, for a couple of days might think it's going to pass, but if you can identify what went wrong, knowing that it was a large scale EMP attack, for example, we're immediately going to be thrown back, a couple hundred years, and be going back to the times where we don't have,
But how quickly could our government get things back up and running? Like, how vulnerable are we really in this country to something like that?
Well, for something, the idea of a nuke going off in the U.S., I wouldn't say that's likely by any means, and obviously we have a lot of measures to protect against that. So, thinking about it as a likely event is not probably super healthy, but thinking about it as a possible event, we like to say it's a low probability, high impact event, right?
Sure.
So,
are there other ways that our power grid could be affected that don't take nuclear bombs?
Sure. Yeah. A simple virus, right? If somebody goes into our infrastructure system, right, whether it be the power grid or our water supply, and they can do an electronic virus to shut down the ability to move power or move water. Our transportation system can be shut down, with simple electronic warfare and viruses, or it could be a literal, physical, chemical or biological attack on our water supply. So there's a lot of possibilities.
So where does someone start? Like, you are throwing out a lot of scenarios and a lot of fallout that could potentially come from something that doesn't really seem too far-fetched. So when people come to you and they say, where do I start? How do they get, begin this journey?
Yeah, and again, it's gonna be different depending on the individual and where they live and how big their family is. But everybody can start by just simply having enough supplies at home to get you through a week, right? Is a great starting point, because that's very easy to do.
Yeah. What did I hear? If that happens, we run out of food in, is it 30 days? Like at the grocery stores?
Oh yeah, for sure. The grocery stores are being resupplied, constantly, right? Daily with deliveries and shipments. And if that transportation system goes down, our food system gets shut down. You can't rely on obviously grocery stores when we're talking about some of these extreme, disaster events, right? But even with something like the pandemic, we saw these runs, there's no toilet paper, and people rush to the grocery stores and just buy up all the stuff. We see that happen. Even just locally when there's an extreme weather event, right? There's a big freeze coming and everyone rushes to the store and grabs everything off the shelves, and you can't buy food for a couple of days. Well, imagine if you couldn't buy food now for a month or several weeks, right? So a good starting place for people is just making sure that you can survive in your own home, for ideally at least a month, right? And beyond that, things can get more scary, and we'll kind of talk through that too. But starting
out,
out,
goal though, to hunker down in your home.
So it depends on the event, right? If it's, here in Dallas, we saw power outages where people were out of power for over a week, right?
Freezing temperatures,
freezing temps, right? No power for 2 weeks. So in an event like that, you're going to hunker down at home, right? You need water. Okay. You need food and you need shelter. So you have to be able to stay warm in your home. You've got to have fresh water. You want to have, essentially a gallon of water per day per person in your house, right? That's a great minimum starting point. More is of course better, because you need water to, cook and things like that. So a starting point would just be have enough food and water in your home to keep your family hunkered down, for a few weeks. Okay. So that's a very low barrier to entry, right? You can get canned goods. There's several companies now that are doing the freeze dried food. and that's got a really long shelf life. You can buy it once and have it for years. And so that's kind of the low hanging fruit, right? Have water storage in your house, and just make sure that you can at least, get your family through, a few weeks of hunkering down in the house. Now, when we start talking about leaving the home and when that might be a better option, that's if more of a, really, really disastrous scenario, right? Beyond
how are you leaving
just
your home
weather.
if an EMP is taking out your car?
Exactly. You got to think about it ahead of time. And, contrary to popular belief, an EMP isn't going to literally take out all the cars. Studies have been shown that, a lot of cars, most cars even, might still operate, but they might not operate the way that they should.
We don't have our GPS. We don't have our radio stations, maybe.
Right. Stuff like that. If you have an older car, it's less likely to have complications because it's not relying so much on electronics. Right. So, but you don't want to be in a position where all of a sudden, you only had stuff in your house for a couple of weeks, and now you're faced with, maybe everyone in your communities without food, water, shelter, and so now they're going to start, potentially moving around looking for people that do have that stuff. So there's certainly a time where you're going to want to get out. I think the people that are lucky enough to have places to go outside of major metropolitan areas are definitely better off, right? If you happen to be lucky enough to have a vacation home somewhere outside the city, a ranch, even a lake house in a smaller community, you're already better off. So start thinking about what you can now put at that house. And a big key there is get there before you really need to, right? So if things start getting dicey, right? If there is an attack on our infrastructure, get your family out there, quickly, because the longer you wait, the harder it might be to get there, and the more obstacles you might encounter along the way. So, if you're lucky enough to have a place outside of the Metroplex, good for you. Start looking at that as, your kind of main plan. And if not, then start looking, at communities you can team up with to survive, not just alone as a community.
I want to talk about kind of like, let's walk through real world scenario, because this happened recently. If you remember when the cell phone towers went down, do you remember that? And like AT&T, the service shut off for millions of people across the country. And it was very eye-opening for myself, who likes to think I'm relatively prepared. But that day, everything kind of changed. So suddenly people woke up. They just thought, maybe my specific tower wasn't getting service. And then we learned this is widespread. Millions of people don't have it. But you suddenly couldn't, if you had an emergency, you realized you couldn't call 911. No one's coming to help you.
Right.
I also realized if this is going to be long term and my husband's already at work, I can't coordinate with him.
Yep.
So we don't have a rendezvous point. We don't have a coordination point. And then I also realized I need to know, remember street names, because now I don't have my GPS to plug in. So I might need a map. There were just a lot of things.
There's so much.
So kind of walk me through what you were thinking during that scenario and maybe giving advice to people.
For sure. And that's a great thing to talk about, communication, right? So two main things there that on what you just covered is having a communications plan, and then having a movement plan, a rendezvous plan, right? So we don't want to obviously rely just on our cellular networks, right? So communication is a huge part of,
Mm-hmm.
And there are plenty of ways to communicate outside of cell, right? The sat phones are a great option, okay, but they are expensive. Annually you're going to spend several $100s a year just to keep minutes on a sat phone. But if you have a sat phone in a Faraday bag, hopefully it's going to work, right? Unless our satellite systems get shut down, then okay, cool, cell phone doesn't work, no problem, turn on the sat phone. Obviously, who are you calling, right? So your spouse, they would have to have their sat phone. Now, things like that.
Did you use those in the military?
Yeah, we use sat phones.
Did you ever have issues with your sat phones while you were overseas?
No, they're pretty reliable.
Okay.
Yeah, very reliable. So unless the phone itself gets damaged or our satellite system gets compromised, then sat phones are a great system to rely on. Now, I bring that up kind of first because we're very close to having sat phone capability through our cell phone, right? Thanks to Starlink. So at some point in the very near future, we're going to be able to open up an app on the phone that's like a Starlink app and use our phone to communicate via satellite
That's
So
so
we're not,
cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's which is going to be great for everybody. And even right now, they're already, putting that in place on phones for emergency use only. So now, of course, your phone's gonna have to be charged and, powered. And, if there's no power when you plug it into the wall, do you have a solar
Mhm.
power charger for your phone? So those are things to think about. But satellite communications is a great way to communicate, outside of the cell network. And then beyond that, you've got radios, so there's, the shortwave radios you can buy at, Walmart are only going to get you a mile or so, maybe 5 miles. So those are really not really reliable for the kind of scenario that we're talking about.
Mhm.
And then beyond that, you got GMRS radios, which will get you, in ideal conditions up to probably 35 miles. And you don't need a license to operate those. So those are a good option, and they're inexpensive. So we want to always have layers of plans, right? So when you talk about a communications plan,
Mhm.
cell is number one. Outside of cell, maybe sat phone if you have that ability. Otherwise, you're looking at like a GMRS radio, or if you really want to go into it, a ham radio can get you. You can talk globally with a ham radio.
Mhm.
With
But
a
you have to have a
ham,
license for that.
yeah, you need
Yeah.
a license, and learning how to use those effectively, is more of a process.
Mhm.
So that's a great option for those people out there that are really thinking, if they really want to dive into it, maybe it becomes a hobby for them, then yeah, go down the ham radio path. Great.
Yeah.
So comms is super important, right? And outside of comms, having a other communication plans and rendezvous points and link up points already in place
Mhm.
is gonna be something else that people can put in place that's really low hanging fruit to be prepared, right?
Yeah.
If talk to your family about, all right, if one day we pick up our phones and they're not working, what do we do, right?
How
Well,
many hours until
yeah, it's
we
like
hit, without communication, do we go to this rendezvous point?
exactly,
Yeah.
right? So if it's like, okay, cell phones go down, but that's the only thing that's gone down, there's no other indication of anything else, right? News networks are still broadcasting, there's no talk of a big strike or anything like that, then okay, no need to panic. Make sure you get home that day and get ready for kind of the next step. But if you can't get a hold of anybody, yeah, you want to get home, have your rendezvous plan, right? But maybe you're traveling, maybe you're
Yeah.
in New York City and your family's here, right? Then link up becomes obviously much harder. And oftentimes our commercial airline systems will shut down during emergencies like
Mhm.
that, so no flies. So that's a whole nother ball game of like, well, what if I'm not local? But for most people, having just a plan of rendezvousing at home and having link up points there, or if you're on vacation, just having basic plans. All right, everybody, if something goes wrong, link up point A is going to be our hotel. Link up point B is going to be, pick another spot, right? Maybe maybe a little bit outside the city that you can link up with.
Mhm.
And locally, people want to link up at home. And then plan B might be, okay, if you are lucky enough to have that ranch or lake house, then and no one can get a hold of anybody, then you just know, all right, after pack up your stuff, hopefully you've got some stuff ready to go in bags and emergency food, and you throw it in the
Yeah.
car and you start driving to link up point B.
Yeah. I actually thought a lot about that with the wildfires. I mean, that was a really scary situation because if you know the Palisades or you've been over by Santa Monica, like there's like 2-lane road down the PCH. I mean, and people trying to get to their children and not being able to communicate, and you got to get out of there fast. I'm like, these scenarios to me are not super far-fetched. And that was not an EMP, but that was a natural disaster
Yep.
that could strike at any time.
Yeah, and something like that, you want to act quickly, right?
Mhm.
So, in fact, I've got a very good friend of mine who lives in the Palisades, and on that day, he's obviously tracking the fires, but he made the decision, early on, like, I'm going to go get my kids from school,
Yeah.
right? And literally, as he's picking them up from school, the school's announcing, "Hey, everybody, come get your kids," and
Chaos.
just chaos, right?
Mhm.
So you want to move quickly. There's a line. You don't want to panic
Mhm.
and cause panic. But the longer you wait, the more of a mess things are going to be,
Yeah.
right? So you don't want to be caught up in the crowds of chaos, right? And then the roads get bogged down. So
Mhm.
you want to move quickly, get your family to safety, get your family together, and have alternate routes, right? You mentioned street maps, having maps and knowing street names. Get some paper maps, right? Start highlighting routes,
Yeah.
several different routes. for where you may need to go to get to
Hmm.
safety, and a lot of people these days, especially the younger generation, have never really looked at a paper map,
They don't even know which direction, or we go north, south. They don't know the grid,
right? They don't,
so to speak. Yeah.
so, and that stuff can be fun, if you're listening to this and you have a family, like, turn it into something that's, hey, we're gonna learn about this, right? And don't that way you're not causing panic, like,
Hmm.
in your family and kids. But it's like, hey, everybody, like, if you have a 16-year-old kid, make it a fun thing. Say, hey, when I learned to drive, I had to use a paper map, and start teaching them the old ways.
MapQuest, guys. No, we had to memorize the streets. I didn't even know if
Literally, yeah,
MapQuest was out yet at that
right.
point. So you mentioned the Faraday bags. I mean, how much like if you don't have that, but your car's in a garage, are we getting any sort of protection being indoors?
Yeah, you actually are. I mean, a car in a garage, it's dependent on so many things, right? What directionality of a potential EMP,
Oh
what's
wow.
you could even be, if you live in a mountainous region, right? The mountainside could actually somewhat protect you from
Hmm.
from strikes in some cases. So it depends on a lot of things, but yes, a car simply being in a garage is more protected than a car out on the street. And it depends on, well, what kind of garage,
Hmm.
how's the house built, all that stuff. But a Faraday bag, for those that don't know, is a bag that's protecting an electronic device typically. So, and they're making Faraday bags now that are, really, really large duffel bags where you can
Yeah.
have, keep things in there, but they also make really tiny ones that you can just put your cell phone in. So
So
if you,
what should go in that? Like if you have a larger Faraday bag, what would you suggest? Is that something that people just keep things in
you would want to keep,
constantly,
like,
or
you'd want to keep your sat phone in there, right? So
okay?
if you have a sat phone, or your radios, right, just you're storing them somewhere, you might as well store them in a Faraday bag, right? So you're increasing your odds that your items are going to work when you need them to work,
Mm.
right? So but they're cheap. You can get them, several different sources now. Always, as always, buy from a reputable source, right? So you're not getting something that says it is this and it's actually not. But have a sat phone in there, have any of your, radios, communication devices. You ideally just have an old hand crank radio that you can crank for power and be able to listen to, news transmissions or weather
Hmm.
reports that are happening. I mean, think about just tornadoes coming through, right? Tornado
Yeah.
comes through, the power gets knocked
Even
out,
hurricanes. I mean, the people in North
hurricanes.
Carolina are, I mean, they experience that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it takes several days for FEMA to respond.
Hmm.
So, on a low level, events like natural disasters, they're not completely catastrophic, but they're very disruptive. And you need to be able to kind of be on your own for a few days. And if you can't communicate with your family, then
Hmm.
they're worrying, you're panicking. Um, so yeah, if you have a Faraday bag, or get one, put your phone, put a backup phone in it, right? Um, you can still,
Chargers.
yeah, the chart, yeah, have all that stuff together, right?
Hmm.
If you have chargers for these devices, have them with the devices, so you're not, grabbing your Faraday bag
Yeah.
and the chargers on in there, and there's a lot of really good resources online for people to start building out these kind of go bags.
Yeah.
It's a good idea to even have stuff in your car, right? Just have a little extra backpack in your car with just essentials to get you at least through a few days
Hmm.
of something, right? Have some extra water in your car, um, especially people that are living in more mountainous areas. I mean, every year there's people that get stuck and die in blizzards, right? And
Hmm.
so just those deaths could often be avoided by just having essentials in your car that you could live in your car for a few days.
Yeah.
Stay warm, stay hydrated, have backup communications devices. Don't ever overlook the medical component, right? Have
Yeah.
trauma kits, and basic first aid kits, so that a small injury doesn't turn into death.
Well, I always like to hear other people's stories of what they're doing to get prepared. And since you do this professionally, I am sure you have had some wild stories to tell. So, what's kind of one of the just craziest things that people have asked you either to build or help
Oh,
them prep for or do?
I mean, some cool stuff. Some people go all out, right? And they're building gardens, and they want machines to load their own ammunition, and they truly want to kind of be able to be self-sustaining. Um, during the pandemic, we had people that, wanted to buy, 100,000 plus rounds of ammunition, and they were paying a massive premium for it because ammo prices skyrocket. Um, you know, some people want to get gas masks and body armor for their whole family, so you kind of run the whole gamut, right? And people that have the financial resources to do all that, hey, great, more power to you, right? You'd rather have it and not need it, than need it and not
Sure.
have it. So we've seen some interesting, I guess people that have the financial means just say, okay, blank check, just like I want everything, and
Yeah.
so, and then it's fun for us because it's like, all right, cool, we get to go on a shopping spree.
Yeah, what does that mean? Like, so what are you guys doing? What are you getting for these people? Like, we can dream here, for, may not ever be able to afford all of it, but like, I want to hear what they're getting. Are you
Everything.
guys going down as far as getting them the, because when I look at water storage, obviously, and I laugh because I'm like, people probably aren't going to be thinking microplastics when you have no water at a certain time, but they have food grade, biodegradable like containers now to keep this stuff in. I mean, are they really health conscious too as they're getting all of this prepared?
Most of the time with this, some of the health conscious stuff goes out the window because it's like, all right, we're just gonna. You do want to more than stay alive, right? You want to thrive if you can, right? So you don't want to be just surviving on freeze dried food and water that's got bleach in it because you're to keep it clean, right? So the more you go into it, the more you can start having redundancies. Like water, for example. You want to have water already stored. And they do make, these, several 100-gallon containers that people can have in their homes with water storage. And, over time, you do want to cycle those out, by the way. You don't want to let them just sit for a decade.
How long can they sit?
It's several years. And as long as you're treating it right. And you could be treating it with bleach, but you want to think beyond that, right? You want to have, if you already have water storage at home, great. Well, you still want to, it doesn't mean you're just done with water, right?
Find a water source.
Yeah. You still want to have, filtration devices or, purification tablets. You also want to have water testing kits. So I
forget the name of it. You probably know what I'm talking about. They advertise that you can put it on the water bottle and like go fill up the lake water and drink it.
Yeah, like a life straw, probably something like that.
So that's legit. I mean,
yeah, really that's legit. Yeah, so that's just a great filtration system. Yeah. And luckily for us, like here in North America, filtering your water is typically going to be good enough if it's a good water filter. If you're in other places like Africa, there's other waterborne viruses and stuff there.
Well, I'm just thinking if you go out to your land and you don't have a well or you don't have water source that's happening, you only have a lake. I mean,
yeah, you can. I mean, you can treat that lake water with water purification tablets and drink it. You can purify it with water purification and filter it. But at that point, the filtration is more of a comfort thing. And so you're not drinking murky water with mud in it. So you want to have layers of solutions, right? So with water, have purification tablets, have filtration devices, have the ability to boil water, have water testing kits. A lot of people don't think about that. So you can test water. You can drink pool water if you need to, as long as it's not over chlorinated.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I mean, we all swallow water when we're swimming
right.
when we're young.
It's technically safe to drink if it's not, as long as it's not over chlorinated. Okay. So, and on the food stuff, again, have layers, right? It's all about not just relying on one source. So having emergency food is great, but having chickens that lay eggs for you is even better, right? Having the ability to hunt for food and knowing how to do that and process meat is great.
How much of these people are coming to you and also want self-defense training in conjunction with like the preparation piece?
Yeah, okay. All of them, because they realize that it's important that you are able to protect your family wherever you are, right? Because in situations like this, people get desperate, their behavior becomes unpredictable. And at the end of the day, pretty much anyone is going to do whatever it takes to keep their family safe. So if they're not prepared, they're going to be going out and trying to procure food and shelter from someone else who maybe is. So the self-defense firearms component of it is definitely a big piece of it. You want to have the ability to keep your family safe and protect them from outside bad actors. So all these people, stock up on firearms, ammunition, and then get the training to do that. Some people go as far as to having, body armor and night vision and, the whole 9 yards, which is great. It's like, hey, if you have the means to do that. But again, for a lot of these people, it becomes something that's fun for them. It's like, they love learning about the latest and greatest gear and gadgets. Most people aren't going to kind of go that far, but, you at least want to have, a simple, few firearms for yourself and your family to utilize for production if you need to.
All right. So top 5 things that somebody that doesn't have millions of dollars to go and spend on preparation, but what are the top 5 things that they can do to at least get them through? What do you call that period?
I would say just that initial, you want to be able to get through a month, really.
A month.
So
all right. So what's the top 5 things that you need?
So water is number one. Like you have to have access to clean water. So that's very basic, right? Water purification tablets, filters. So have the ability to get yourself water beyond just what you have maybe stored. Okay. Because maybe you're on the move, right? So top 5 would be, water, and then quickly followed by food. It's the basics: water, shelter, food. I would say firearms is a part of that. And then power. So those are probably your top ones, right? When I say power, I mean, do you have a solar panel to charge devices? Do you have a generator to power, essential items, and this could be a small portable generator, or it could be a generator that's powering your house. So you can keep the food in your freezer from thawing out. So those are probably the top 5, and all of these are, they're not expensive, right? You can go and get enough food and water and shelter supplies for your family for 30 days, for relatively an inexpensive price. And you don't have to go out and buy the pre-prepared emergency food because it's not cheap, so you can go back and just get canned goods, right? Have canned goods and rice and beans and bulk food that's not going to spoil.
Is the advantage though of the freeze-dried food just the duration of it?
Yeah, the duration of it, it's you buy it once and it can sit there in your closet, or
like 25 years.
Yeah,
it says. Yeah,
absolutely. And then it's quick and convenient to make, and so it's going to keep you alive. Now,
but again, you need more water.
Yes, you need water for that. Yeah. Water is definitely probably number one, right? And on the food side, again, have options, right? We would all be miserable if we're having to survive for several months on just your family's emergency freeze-dried food, right? You want to be able to mix it up, right? Because again, it goes back to that whole, you don't want to just survive. You want to thrive, as much as you can, right?
Yeah.
So having some other food items to get in the mix, ideally, fresh meat, fresh game meat or meat that you've been managed to keep frozen in a freezer because you have a generator. Those are all very basic things that most people have access to.
Yeah, but in the apocalypse scenes that we see in the movie, how much time are we talking here before you start thriving? Is it 3 months? Is it 6 months? Is it?
Well, if things are really going on for several months, you're not going to want to be in a heavily populated area, right? If you're in a population dense area, you're at the most risk. So ideally you can get out into a rural area and establish a community. And that's something that, people need to realize is, we're not wired to be, just alone and independent, right? And you don't want to be, because you're going to get exhausted. If you're a family of 4 or a single person and you're just out there in the middle of, a rural area trying to survive by yourself, it's going to be tough. And you're not going to be able to do it effectively, right? So you really want to build a community. And most of America can do that, right? Out in the rural areas, start talking to your neighbors and just establish those relationships. Because you're not going to want to go it alone. And maybe you've got a neighbor that has, cattle, and you got another neighbor that is growing
garden.
You're right.
Yeah.
And so you start, developing your own little localized community, and you can thrive in that environment. If we're truly talking about a, doomsday type scenario where people are kind of having to rebuild, they're not going to be, thriving in an apartment complex in a downtown, city, right? So that's where you're going to encounter a lot more of those people who are panicking and unprepared, and they're going to want to, pillage.
Yeah. How likely is that scenario, though, in America, that we really get to that state?
I don't think it's likely at all. I don't think it's likely to happen. But again, even if the likelihood was, less than 5%, it's
Hmm.
like, well, it goes back to that, it's low probability, but the impact of it is completely life changing and resetting.
Have you noticed this? This is something that I feel like I just observed after President Trump, got in office again, that the people who were, it's almost like a political mindset now for a lot of people. I'm sure there are still people that now are prepping more because President Trump, won the election, but there were people that seem to be more fearful of the future and prepping more given the uncertainty of
Totally.
the elections. Do you kind of see these waves
Oh,
around election time?
very much so. Very, very much so. No, you nailed it. I mean, prior to this last election, people were really worried. I mean, I, I shouldn't say not most people, right? Most people are just kind of sheep and they go about their daily lives, and unfortunately, they should be more tuned in to what could happen,
Yeah.
and how the direction of the country was not trending well, right? And so people definitely were preparing much more prior to the election and leading up to it.
Hmm.
And then Trump gets elected and people kind of relax a little bit. But I would say, don't let this be the time where you just let your guard down and think
Bingo.
everything's hunky dory, right?
Hmm.
Don't get too comfortable. Because, 4 years from now, we don't know how things are going to be, right?
Yeah.
Things could change in an instant too. We live in a pretty volatile, global environment right now, and with a lot of uncertainties, and we don't know how conflicts that are happening overseas are going to end up affecting us locally. So, don't let your guard down. Definitely start looking into it. It's not hard. There's a lot of really good resources now, online, and some really good social media people that, this is what their sole purpose is, to provide information to people who are looking for it. So
Yeah.
it's definitely out there. You don't need, a person or a company like me or and Tac7 to walk your way through this. Some people want the easy button and just, do it for you. But people can go down that road, and they definitely
That's the most
should.
anti-plug I've ever heard, by the way.
Sorry, you don't need me.
Just about to let you plug your company.
Uh,
You don't need us.
Please call us. I want everyone to take initiative and look into it, and get this stuff going on their own, because they can, and everybody should. And it's not being paranoid, like, you're just being prepared.
Sure.
It's kind of like, when we teach mindset, and you've heard me talk about mindset a lot. We're not saying you should be living in a state of paranoia and just be constantly worried about this happening. And you can mitigate that paranoia by just simple preparation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, for the people that do want the easy button, where can they find you? And give them all the places that they can
Yeah.
go and find your company.
Our company is Tac7 Security Solutions. Our website's Tac7 USA. It's tac7usa.com.
The number 7.
The number 7. And we have an Instagram. The Tac7 USA is our Instagram. And yeah, reach out. You can go to our website and hit the contact us button. We love helping people. We love helping people feel safe and prepared and get trained. So yeah, we love it.
Well, I can personally vouch for a lot of things that Jeff is talking about. So yes, go and check them out. We'll drop all that in the show notes as well, so you can find that easily. But guys, go get yourself prepared. And Jeff, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks,
and
Amy.
for coming on the show.
It's been great. Thank you.